Hey, what's up, everybody? Thanks for checking this out. Today, let's see, I'm just going to go over and try to recreate some of the stuff that I did for one of my Houdini renders. I get some questions every once in a while on how I did some of the things on my Instagram page. And, and if you guys see anything that you like and you want to know more about it, you can just check out my Instagram page. It's under at grantrants. And if you see anything in here that you kind of are curious about and you want me to go over, I can always try to take apart a scene file or try to recreate something. Anyways, I had a question about the setup for this render, and so I'm going to try to recreate it. It was actually rendered in Redshift, and I don't have Redshift on this machine, but for the basic geometry and setup and things like that, I think we can go over doing some of this. So yeah, let's dive into Houdini and try to recreate this. And it's not going to be exactly the same, but we'll try to get something close to there and just at least follow the general concepts to get there. So in Houdini, I'm going to drop a geometry node, toss that in there, and we're going to dive in and delete this out. All right. From there, we are going to use just some kind of base geometry, and the base geometry that we're going to use is just a platonic solid. So we're just going to grab platonic solid, put that in there. That is taking a while to run. Okay, here we go, and let's use an icosahedron, I guess. Yeah. And on top of that, we're going to just scatter some points. Scatter some points. So put a scatter on there. And scatter some points. And by default, it's going to scatter about 1,000 points, so that's a little much. So let's bring that down to something like 40. I think that's probably good. All right. And then from there, I think the way I colored all the strands was using a just randomized the attribute for color, and I just had that carry down to the rest of the node chain. So at this point, I actually initialized a randomized color attribute. So I'm just gonna get a random attribute randomize, put that on there, hook these guys up, and it's gonna go into CD. So yeah, it looks something like that. You can't really see it. You know what? I'm going to hit D. I'm going to go to the geometry, and I'm going to make these points a little bit bigger for you guys to see. Hopefully you guys can see them. There we go. All right. So I'm going to start it off here, but let's go back to this platonic solid and bring the radius down a little bit to be about that small. All right, and then from there, I actually use a transform to make this grow. There's other ways you could do it. You could put it into a pop network, and that would work too, and just have them emit particles, but that wouldn't make it dynamic, and I just wanted something that would not have to be relying on the previous frame to simulate, so I just used a transform here. So toss a transform in this one, and on the transform, what I did was I just tossed in a bit of math, just so that I don't have to keyframe anything. So for the rotation, what I did was I wrote sine. So I got the sine function of the frame number, and I times that by 1.5, and then I times the entire thing by 2. And let me explain exactly what that is. So when you use a sine function, you can have something oscillate back and forth. With rotation, it will just keep rotating back and forth. Sorry, I'm just taking a look at my cheat sheet here so I can explain to you exactly what's going on. And so when you do that, you use a sine function on the frame. And whatever you times that frame by, so right now I have it $f, meaning the frame number, times 1.5, and that would be the speed. So the higher you change, if I change that to times it by 2 or 3 or 4, it'll just start to oscillate faster. And then the second things that I times it by is the amount. So because I'm on rotation, if I turn this higher, then it'll start to rotate even further for every oscillation. So let me show you that in action. So if I just press play right here, you can't actually see it because it's actually really slow. But if I did, like, for example, by 200, you see it turning by 200 degrees, right? And so if you turn this guy up higher, you'll see that, turn it to 5, it'll start rotating faster. So because it'll do it more times in the same amount of time. My playback is starting to slow down here a little bit, but you get the drift. This first number here determines how fast or how many times, or so the rate of it to oscillate. So I'm going to turn it back to 1.5. And the second number here is the amount that it turns. So I'm just going to make that 2. And what I did for this next one, I believe it was, so I took the cosine. Can't see what I'm writing here. So I took the cosine of the same thing, the frame, and I actually times it by 2. And then overall I times it by 20, I believe. And these are like arbitrary numbers. I just was fiddling around with numbers to see what would be a nice type of oscillation for the entire thing. So that's what that turned into. And then this last one, all I did was I wanted to be constantly turning over and over instead of oscillating back and forth. So I just did a $F on the Z rotation. So if we do that, I go back to 1, you can see that it's spinning, but it's also oscillating back and forth a little bit here. All right, hopefully that's straightforward for you guys. And then on top of that, I did on the uniform scale, I actually did another sine function. So I did $F. This time I did it times 0.7. Close that off. And actually, I just leave it like that, but I actually did a times 0.1, which doesn't really affect it much. So having done that, this is what that does. And it kind of closes it back up. Here we go. All right. Okay. Then from there, on all these points, I have, let's check how many points I have here. So on the geometry spreadsheet, I have 40 points. And on these points, I created an attribute. So I'm going to do an attribute create. Attribute create. And I created an ID attribute. So I'm going to create an ID attribute. So if you go to the geometry spreadsheet, then I have all those 40 points that I created, and I have the CD information because I randomized their color. But when I create this attribute create here, I create another attribute called an ID. And right now it's set to 0 because it's set to default. So all the points have it as 0. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn that into an @ptnum, and what that does is it creates an ID attribute that's the exact same thing as the ID of the point number, or the point number becomes the ID attribute. And so, and actually this is a float, and you can actually turn this to a, whoops, not here, turn this into an integer. So that just makes it an integer. So these correspond directly to that. But what that does is, now regardless of the point number, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of be generating more points off of these original points, but each one of those points will always have the same ID number. So you'll see what I mean in the next node, because in the next node, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a trail. So what a trail does, if I make a trail, grab this trail, and so what a trail does, you can see, let me turn up the trail length to something bigger. You can see it start to leave a trail of points. So I'm going to just turn this up to something pretty high, to like maybe 100. So you can actually see more. Here we go. If you get closer, you can actually see there's going to be a trail of 100 points now. And so I can see sort of how that kind of worked out, right? But because we put an attribute create on the original points and gave it the ID and stored the original point numbers on the ID, every new point that's created in each one of these trails has that same ID. So if we go to the geometry spreadsheet and take a look, up until now we only had 40 points, right? But from the trail, we're going to have 40 times 100. So it'll be probably around 4,000, see? So we have 4,000 points. But if you take a look, they all cycle between the same IDs because the ID was attached to them before they started generating. So when they started generating from that first point, they all transferred the ID, so they all have the same ID. So all that to say is that every single one of these colors has the same point attribute ID attribute on them. And so with that, if we do that, and we use something called an add, so we use the add SOP. If you take a look, these are just points and they're not connected, but you can use the add SOP and you can connect them by, if you connect them just like that, that's actually pretty crazy. That's actually pretty interesting. We could do another interesting daily render with just that, actually. Let's see what that looks like in context. That's actually pretty interesting. But we're actually not going to go all points, and we're going to do it by attribute. And the attribute that we're going to use is the ID. So what happens is all the points that have the same attribute get connected with a polygon. So we get our lines. All right. From there, all you need to do is, well, these are actually pretty curved now since they're so close together. But in my original one, I think I actually converted them into something smoother. The reason being is because the trail increment on the last one was actually 10. This one I actually kept it to, oh, here we go. So let's increase it by 10. And so what that does is makes each of the trails longer, but makes them a little more jaggedy. So you see what's going on there? But you see how, because of the points, now the points are so far spread apart that when you use the add, because we had them start to trail further apart. So when we changed up this increment, each of the points are actually further apart. So if we bring this down, they get closer together. But if we spread them apart, then when you add them together, they kind of, you can start to see each segment. And so what I did with that was I put a convert on there. Oops. If I can spell, convert. Grab that convert, toss that onto there. And then I changed it from polygons to a NURBS curve. So that kind of smooths it out, right? And then on top of that, I actually converted it again. So grab another convert, and then I converted it back into polygons. So now that I converted it sort of back into polygons there. All right, so yeah, so if you actually see before, when it was on this add and I took a look, and if I turn on all the points, you see how sparse the points are? Those are original points. And we converted to NURBS, so now they're all curved, but then I converted it back to polygons, so you can see that they're all points again. It's a lot more points now. So that's just basically how that's set up. From there, all we did was actually just start to put a polywire on this. Let me get rid of that. So from there, what we did was I put a polywire on this, I believe. Let's put a polywire on here. That's a bit big, so let's turn down the radius to something smaller, maybe something around there, maybe. Let's give it some more roundness for the divisions, so it's a little bit rounder that way. And I actually have, if we go to the example from the original, which is not there anymore. Where was it? So the example from the original, oh, this is actually this. You see how we have the inner tube, which I'm going to actually turn that into a VDB, but we actually have this outer tube as well. So the outer tube, and the outer tube, if you take a look, the outer tube is kind of delayed in its growth afterwards. Actually cuts off as well, but So the outer tube is based off of the growth of the inner tube. And so the way that we can accomplish that is all we need to do is put a carve node. So we've got the inner tubes right here, and we'll convert those into VDBs in a little bit, but we're going to take a carve node. And what a carve node does is we're going to attach it to here. And what a carve node does is we can actually see that if we let it grow a little further out, I think. There we go. So it's actually able to sort of trim our original curve shorter than it was. So before it was about that long, and now with this carve node here, so here's the actual length with that 0, but let's dial it back a little bit. And we're going to actually trim the ends as well to have it catch up a little bit. So now now we take a look at it. These guys are going to be a little bit delayed in their growth compared to our original, and also turn off. So they're going to end before these guys do, because the original looks like that. All right. That may be a little confusing, but if we actually just hold Option and duplicate this, we take a look at this polywire. It has the same, but I'm going to turn the radius up just a little bit. Now, if we take a look and we compare these, you can see, if I template this, you can see that we've got a fatter one that goes behind the original. So if I template that, you can actually see. So if we go, you can actually see that the skinnier one starts off, and then the fatter one starts up. So there we go. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're just going to turn these into VDBs. So my favorite thing that I always do when I'm doing this kind of organic looking model is I just turn them into VDB from polygons. So I'm going to just grab a VDB from polygons. And what that does is it turns it into, take a look here, it turns into this mess. It actually turns into a SDF volume, so assigned distance field, I believe that's what that stands for. But the voxel size is too big. So let's turn that down to something like 0.1. That is probably not too small, not small enough. Let's go to something smaller. 0.5. Okay, there we go. So now we kind of see our original polygons, or our original shape. That's actually still a little bit too rough of a resolution, so let's actually go down something smaller. But the smaller you make this number, the longer it's going to take to calculate. But actually, that's actually a pretty good representation. I like that. Let's go to something a little bit smaller for this, maybe 1.5. See how it's taking a little bit longer to calculate that? Okay, so now we've got that guy. And we are going to do the same with this guy. So we're just going to hold Option or Alt if you're on a PC, I think, and you would just connect this here. And we get the same thing for this guy now. And now we've actually lost all the colors, but we'll bring them back. If I remember correctly, we'll bring them back with an attribute transfer. Okay, so what we're going to do is we've got this guy, and let's actually, I'll show you what actually is going to happen. We're going to convert this guy back. So we're going to use a VDB, or a convert VDB, and we're going to convert him back into polygons. But now it's a more organic looking mesh. It's actually a lot more finer mesh, but it's a more organic looking mesh, which is actually pretty cool. Okay, this mesh actually might be a little bit too much. Let's do this. Let's go back to 2 and see what that looks like. So the voxel size, when you turn it into a VDB from polygon, kind of dictates when you use this convert VDB back into polygons, kind of the resolution of how much polygons you have here. So the lower this is, so the finer the resolution for those voxels, the more geometry and the more polygons you'll be creating, the smoother it actually looks. But I think for what we're doing, we're here, actually this is fine. And this second input here, actually, for these VDB from polygons, if I don't want to have to always keep changing this voxel size, if you just pipe this first one into the second one, it actually uses this one's voxel size as a guide into here. So you notice how the voxel size isn't showing anymore. So it just actually is just using the voxel size from here. All right, so now we've got this one set as that, and this one converts back into itself. And what we can do here is, I think if we put a color on this, not sure if that's even, oops, if that's even necessary, but if we put a color on this, and then we do an attribute transfer. Okay. And we put that there, and we actually get this poly wire from here. We can actually, you see how we're actually well, by default it uses the color. You can actually specify color in here, but we're actually using these colors from these original polygons, and we're transferring those back onto our new V2B, because when you turn it into a V2B or the SCF volume, it doesn't bring over the color information, but when you convert it back onto polygons, and then I just actually put this color node here just to initialize the color. I'm not even sure if you really need it. No, you don't even need it. All right, and so because it doesn't have any color information at all, so if we take a look at it here, we've lost, well, it actually does have some, no, actually, here we don't have any color information because it's just a, see, when it's a V2B, it has actually no points. And then when we come to here, we're turning it back into polygon, so it has a bunch of points, but it's lost all its color information. And so when we bring this attribute transfer here, we're transferring those colors back onto this geometry. So we get these colors back, all right? We're gonna do the exact same thing on this side. But first, before we do that, what we're going to do is we are going to use a V2B combine, I believe. Yes. So we're going to grab these guys, and we're going to combine it with this one. But the way we combine it is we're going to do a SDF difference. So what that does is punches a little hole in here. And the hole actually might not look really interesting. What we're going to do is, I mean, it might not be definite, so we're going to, let's see if it's definite or not. We'll just grab this guy here and turn it into polygons. Well, it's actually, you can see it. It's actually not bad. You know what I want to do though is I want to smooth these guys out so it's not, you see how I'm seeing this this hexagon pattern here? And I can either smooth it out by just changing the divisions on this poly wire. So if I actually made this higher, like say 9, it'll smooth it out, but that just means that there's more polygons for this V2B from polygons to actually have to try to calculate, which, I mean, the difference between 9 and what it was before, 6 or 5 or whatever it was, it's not that much of a difference. But what you can also do is, at this stage, after you turn it into a V2B, and before you do the combine, or even after you do the combine, actually, you can actually use a V2B smooth. I'm going to use a V2B smooth SDF since we're using FCFs. And this gives it a little more control than just a regular V2B smooth. And so, after we do that, we can smooth it out a bit. That might have smoothed it out a little too much. So let's bring it down to like 1. And so you can see that now it's a little bit smoother. So without this, it's more of a hexagon shape here. And we turn that back on, or we turn it on, and we get more of the smooth tube. But with the smoother tube, this hole actually gets a little bit smaller, and I want to make sure that it's actually a little bit bigger so it looks like our tube over here is actually coming out from it. So what I can do is actually use, so if I go to here, I can use let's see, I believe it's a SDF. So it's a V2B SDF, reshape SDF. So what that does is, I'm going to put that here. Actually, no, am I? Yes, I'm going to put that here. And what a V2B smooth reshape does, or sorry, V2B reshape SDF does, is actually we're grabbing this SDF from here, grabbing it here, and we're making it a little bit fatter. Although, now that it's so fat that when we cut it out of here, it actually is cutting maybe a little bit too much of it, because when we smooth this out, you see how it totally almost disappears. So maybe we don't offset it by 1. So we go into this V2B reshape SDF and we make it offset by maybe about 0.5. How's that look? So we still get some of that tube definition, So when we convert it, we get a bigger hole and a thinner tube. So without this, here, let me just do an AB and show you. Without it, the hole is a lot smaller, but with it, the hole gets a little bigger. And actually, let's just do a 0.3. There we go. I think that's good. So now we have these guys. So if we actually just merge these together, take a look, just merge them together, you can see that it looks like they're emerging, or just a case that's coming over these tubes. And you notice that these have absolutely no color at all. So what we're going to do is the same thing. We're going to use this attribute transfer. Let's just make a copy of it. Grab this, put this here. And we can actually have it, yeah, have the same color. So we're actually just using the same original color from here. Or I think we could actually just change the colors up a little bit. And so what I originally did was, I think I actually got a, let's just get a point VOP. And put that point VOP in between here. And in the point VOP, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a color mix. So I'm going to do a color mix. There we go. And just use this as the primary. Pipe that back into the CD. And change this up to something more like, maybe like that. So we're getting a little bit of variation from the original color, but overall it's going to be dominated by this pink look. Let me just make it a little bit less harsh than that. There we go. Okay, something like that. So if you're not familiar with using VOPs, basically I'm just taking the input from this and I'm grabbing the color information. I'm using a color mix to mix all the color information that it was coming in with a secondary color, which in this case is the pink, and then piping it back into the color. So now we get this. Okay, and I believe in the original there was actually a base geometry as well. That was like a bunch of holes in there. And that was probably created by doing the same thing and using a V2B from polygons. So let's just make a duplicate of this one. I'm making a duplicate of this one because this one already has this secondary from the original piped in, so we don't have to mess with this voxel size. And we're actually going to bring in the original platonic that we started everything off with. So let's bring this guy here, pipe that into here. So we've got this guy. He's actually big because I think we transformed him smaller, didn't we? Yeah, he started off a lot smaller. And so let's just put a transform in between there. Transform. Let's make this a little smaller. Probably about that big is fine. And I believe we could probably smooth it out. So put a smooth. SDF smooth in there. It's a little bit smooth. Let's make it even more smooth than that. Okay, and we're going to actually do a V2B combine. I'm going to use this V2B combine, but what I kind of want to do is use the combined V2B of both of these guys put together. So the two polywires that we just, or the two V2Bs from the polywires. So what we can do is grab this guy, so that's this one, and combine it with the first one that we did. My node chain is actually getting crazy over here, but hopefully I think you guys can follow along here. We actually don't need this guy anymore, so I'll delete that. Okay. And so we're combining them too. So we're going to combine, so SDF union. So now we're combining both of them, and we're going to use that to subtract from this from the original platonic. So we're going to do a difference, and we're just going to pipe it into there. So now we get that, and so if that also turns into, we're going to use a convert V2B. to make that back into geometry. What does that look like? Oh, we need to turn that into polygons. So that kind of looks like that. And I want the holes actually a little bit bigger, so I'm going to do a V2B reshape SDF. Put one of those in between here. By default, it's going to make it a little bit bigger, so we get a little bit better holes in there. And yeah, I think actually we can probably just, instead of, I need to change my sensitivity settings here. Just put that here instead. Too smooth. How's that? All right, and then we can actually pipe this into here too. So we get that original mesh that everything's coming out from. But we need to give it some color. So let's just give it some color, just for the heck of it. Color. And I don't remember what our original color was. Original color was actually this teal looking thing. So let's just make it that blue, light blue. Sorry, let me get rid of that dock for you. And then, so let's just make it that light blue look. Right, I believe it's something like that. And then from there, it takes a little while for this thing to calculate. So you see, it's because it's converting everything to SDF volumes and then converting it back into polygons. But what I did from there is, so all that does now, if we go back to the beginning, what I need to do is bring this up a little bit higher. So I'm going to use a transform. And I'll make sure that this guy, oops, at least lives somewhere on top of the ground plane. So just it'll drop a little bit in the beginning. He's going to start from there. Because from there, all I did was, let's see, let's make a ground plane. So if you just go into shelf tools and make ground plane, then it automatically makes a ground plane for the dynamics. And also what it also does is automatically makes a dot network for the dynamics, and it makes this ground plane. So I'm just going to turn this off because I don't really need to see it. But if I turn on this auto dot network, then we just have the ground plane, and it creates all these nodes for the dynamics network. So let me just hit L to get this a little bit nicer looking. Okay, but we don't have our original geometry in there. So we're going to grab this original geometry, and we're just going to make it a deforming object. Basically, that's all we need to do. So actually, right now, since we started doing our dynamics, and that kind of, there's a chance that things might freeze or things might crash, so I'm just going to save this out. Let's save it out. And my computer is taking a little while. Here we go. And let's go to here. I should call this 05. All right. Oh, actually, we are going to do this. We're going to make a new folder here. I'm going to call it that, accept, and then we're going to save that out. All right, so now if we go into here, it also actually created this geometry node here. So if I hit L, it's a little better. And so this is already set to deforming geometry. We've already got gravity on here. So if we press play, I'm going to hit save real quick to make sure everything's okay. Hit save. And we start up the dynamics network. Things should start growing. Oh, actually, I did something totally wrong here. This actually needs to be an active object. So all it is a deforming object, so it knows that it's actually moving around, but it's not being affected by gravity because it's not an active object. Because actually, I shouldn't have pressed deforming object. I should have just gone and used rigid bodies, just made it a hero object. But it's not doing anything really complex, so we can just go into the geo here, and we can actually just say active, create active object. So if you create the active object, I'm sorry, I'm gonna cough and probably sneeze at the same time here. Hold on. Man, this flu season was crazy. Okay. So now that you've hit create active object and use deforming object or deforming geometry, it's a mesh that actually moves, and it's actually an active object, so it'll be affected by gravity and other dynamics in the scene. So now, if I hit up on the arrow pad, it actually starts my dynamics, and we'll actually start to see it. Should start reacting to the geometry, I believe. And this is going to take a while for everything to bake out, so actually we'll probably skip this part and just show you the original file, what I did, but this is actually what it took to get to this point. Now, it doesn't look like it's interacting at all. And maybe, I wonder why. Surface collision guide. It's a deforming geometry. So let's see. Let's get out of here, go back into here and see what's going on in here. Figure out why. Sorry about that, folks. File cache. Right, so actually show this. Actually, oh, it's just that I'm not showing what's going on. I did not do something right here. So let's go back and fix that. Let's delete this out. Let's go up here. Delete all these things that were created. My throat is starting to kill me, guys. I'm gonna have to call it a night soon. Okay. So make this a hero object. Sorry about that. Okay, I'll make it a hero object. Dive into the dot network. L. Here we go, and that's probably what I needed to do. Make it a deforming geometry, and hit play. If I do that, it'll be, yeah, see. So now it's being affected by dynamics because it needed to be a hero object. Because it didn't have the rigid body solver, actually, that's probably what it was. Yeah. And so now it's acting as an object that can be affected by gravity. So now it fell down from the place that from the original position of us putting it up a little bit. And so now, because it's a deforming geometry, as the particles start to grow out of it, it will actually start to grow and push itself. It's like the geometry is actually growing. Here we go. So we're finally going to see some of that geometry coming and popping through there. There we go. And now you should start to see it reacting to that. It's going to push itself up. There you go. And so this is actually the part that actually takes a long time. So you have to actually let it sim and work with the dynamics and create this geometry. My original, if you take a look, my original was a little bit thicker. The pipes are a little bit thicker and things like that. And that's just a matter of turning the polywire thicker. And yeah, I mean, and all the other steps are actually all the same. So from there, you just render it out. As long as the shader that you use is using the point color, so the CD from the actual geometry, then it will inherit the color in the shader into the render. And if you take a look, the reason why, well, if I take a look at here, let me just push this off the side and show you this. So yeah, the reason why I was able to have it land right in the middle of the camera like this, and start off from the side and sort of land in the middle of the camera, because I had it sim and I had it take a walk, and then I positioned the camera to where it lands afterwards. And you can do that by actually, if you don't want to have to sim it every time you change something out, or yeah, if you just cache it first, then you can actually just predictably see where it's going to go, and then you can adjust your camera. So yeah, that's about it, guys. I'm gonna call it the night. I thought this was gonna be a lot quicker, but sorry, I was kind of rambling on and on, as I usually do. Like I said, if you have any, I mean, look, I'm like the usual disclaimer that I have to say, I'm still very much a beginner in Houdini, and I was just messing around with it. I wanted to see what I could do in a year, and so I did a Houdini render every day for a year. I watched a tutorial every day, and I did a render every day. I'm still very much a beginner. I have no idea what I'm doing a lot of the times, and just pulling stuff out of my butt and trying to figure some things out. But after going through a year of it, I kind of got a little bit familiar with the interface and figured out a few things and a few tricks and things like that. So if you ever look through my Instagram, I'm at grantrants. And if you take a look at anything in here and you're curious about how it was done in Houdini, I can always, I'm going to try to do this every week and try to get a tutorial out every once in a while. They tend to get really long and I ramble, and I'm really sorry about that, and I really hate the sound of my own voice. But if you have any questions, I can go over it. Or you can just hit me up and DM me on Instagram or YouTube or email or whatever it is. My website is at grantinouye.com, and I can answer any questions you have or point you in the right direction, at least. Because I watched about a tutorial a day for a year. So I at least can be a database of where you can look for certain tutorials on certain techniques that you're trying to do, at the very least. But yeah, that's it. Thanks for tuning in.